When we hear the name BTS, what comes to mind? Sold-out stadiums, billions of streams, luxury penthouses, Grammy nominations, and a net worth that could make Wall Street bankers jealous. But here's the thing. What if I told you that behind all that glitter and gold, every single member of BTS has carried debts so massive, so jaw-dropping, that even their millions couldn't erase the weight of what they owe? And no, we're not just talking about credit cards or bank loans. We're talking about debts that shaped who they are, debts to their families, to their past, to the struggles that nearly broke them before the world even knew their names. Can you guess which member once owed so much that he seriously considered quitting music forever? Or which member's family sacrificed everything, and I mean everything, just so he could chase a dream with zero guarantee? What about the member who quietly paid off a debt so enormous it stunned even his own bandmates? From trainee loans that piled up like mountains to emotional debts that no amount of fame could ever fully repay, this list will change the way you see BTS forever. So buckle up, because we're counting down from number 7 to number 1, and trust me, the closer we get to the top, the harder this hits. Let's go. Number 7, Jimin, the millionaire idol whose business empire crumbled into a mountain of losses. You probably know Seokjin as the worldwide handsome, the eldest young of BTS, who always makes everyone laugh, the guy who blows kisses at cameras like he owns the world, and honestly, with his face and his fame, you'd think everything this man touches turns to gold, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because behind that confident smile and those dad jokes, Jimin made one of the boldest financial gambles in the history of K-pop idols, and it didn't exactly end the way anyone expected. Let's rewind. Jimin was born on December 4th, 1992, in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, and unlike some of his bandmates whose stories are soaked in poverty and struggle, Jimin actually came from a relatively stable background. His father was reportedly a CEO of a company, which means young Seokjin grew up in a household where money wasn't the biggest problem. He went to Konkuk University, majored in film and acting, and his original dream wasn't even to become an idol, he wanted to be an actor. Imagine that. The man who would later sell out stadiums with 70,000 screaming fans originally just wanted to stand in front of a camera and deliver dramatic lines. But fate had other plans. A big hit entertainment casting manager spotted him on the street, literally just walking near his university, and thought he had the visuals to be a star. Jimin auditioned, got accepted, and just like that, his life took a completely different turn. But here's the thing nobody talks about enough. The moment Jimin signed that trainee contract with Big Hit, the debt clock started ticking. See, in the K-pop industry, becoming a trainee isn't free. The company invests in you, vocal lessons, dance training, housing, food, transportation, styling, everything, and all of that gets logged as a debt that you have to pay back from your future earnings, if you even debut at all. And Big Hit in 2011 and 2012 was not the powerhouse it is today. This was a small company, practically on the edge of bankruptcy, run by Bang Si-hyuk who had big dreams, but very thin pockets. The training facilities weren't glamorous. The dorms were cramped. The meals were basic. But the debt? The debt was still very real. Jimin trained for about 2 years before BTS debuted on June 13, 2013, and during that time, every single one spent on his development was being tallied up. Now, nobody from Big Hit or Hybe has ever publicly disclosed the exact trainee debt figures for BTS members. But industry insiders and former K-pop trainees have consistently said that trainee debts can range anywhere from 100 million won to over 500 million won. That's roughly 75,000 to 400,000 USD, depending on how long you train and how much the company invests. For a group like BTS, which had extensive training, pre-debut content production, music video shoots, and overseas trips even before they officially debuted, you can bet that number was on the higher end. And here's the painful part. BTS didn't become an overnight success. Their debut song, No More Dream, didn't exactly set the charts on fire. Their early albums sold modestly. They were grinding on small stages, doing fan signs in front of 30 people, sleeping in a single cramped apartment where 7 guys shared everything. For the first couple of years, they were not making the kind of money that would wipe out that trainee debt quickly. Jin, the guy from a comfortable family, was suddenly living in a reality where every paycheck went toward paying back what the company had spent on him. That's a humbling experience, no matter where you come from. But here's where the story gets really interesting and really expensive. Fast forward to when BTS exploded globally, and suddenly Jin had serious money. We're talking billions of won in annual income from album sales, tours, endorsements, and Hybe stock. And what did Jin do with that money? Well, among other things, he invested in real estate and business ventures. One of the most talked about moves was his decision to co-own a Japanese-style restaurant called Suga with his older brother, Kim Seokjin. This wasn't some little side hustle or a casual hobby project. This was a full-blown restaurant business in the competitive Seoul dining scene, specializing in Japanese steamed cuisine. They put real money into it, premium location, high-quality ingredients, proper staffing, the works. And at first, things looked promising. The restaurant got massive attention simply because of Jin's name. Fans flocked to eat there, social media posts about the restaurant went viral, and it seemed like Jin had found a winning formula, combine celebrity fame with a genuine food business. But running a restaurant is brutally hard, even when you're one of the most famous people on the planet. The food industry has razor-thin margins, unpredictable costs, and relentless competition, especially in a city like Seoul where a new trendy restaurant opens practically every week. And then COVID-19 hit. The pandemic absolutely devastated the restaurant industry worldwide, and Seoul was no exception. Strict social distancing rules, reduced operating hours, plummeting foot traffic, all of it crushed small and medium-sized restaurants. Suga struggled. Reports emerged that the restaurant was losing money, and despite Jin and his brother's efforts to keep it alive, the writing was on the wall. Eventually, the restaurant closed its doors. The exact financial losses were never publicly confirmed, but considering the initial investment in a premium Seoul location, the operational costs over several years, and the devastating impact of the pandemic, industry analysts estimated that the total losses could have been in the hundreds of millions of won. For Jin, a man who had already climbed out of one financial hole, his trainee debt, this was another blow. But he didn't let it break him. And then there's the real estate. Jin purchased a luxury apartment in the Hanam the Hill complex, one of the most exclusive and expensive residential addresses in all of South Korea. This is the kind of place where apartments regularly sell for 4 to 5 billion won, that's roughly 3 to 4 million USD, and the monthly maintenance fees alone are enough to make ordinary people cry. Buying property at that level, even for someone as wealthy as Jin, represents an enormous financial commitment. Whether he paid in full or took out a mortgage, and given South Korean property purchasing norms, a significant loan component is entirely plausible. We're still talking about a debt-level commitment that would make most people's heads spin. So when you add it all up, the trainee debt that took years to pay off, the restaurant venture that hemorrhaged money before closing down, and the luxury real estate that demands ongoing financial commitment, Jin's total financial exposure over the years has been nothing short of staggering. The man who fans lovingly call worldwide handsome has been quietly shouldering the kind of financial weight that would crush ordinary mortals. But you know what makes Jin different? He never complained. Not once. He turned his losses into lessons, kept investing in himself and his craft, and continued to show up with that ridiculous confidence and charm that only Kim Seokjin can pull off. And honestly, that's what makes him worthy of this list, not because the debt defines him, but because of how gracefully he carried it. But hold on, don't get too comfortable, because if you think Jin's numbers were impressive, wait until you hear what's coming next. Which member took on a financial risk so enormous that even the Korean media couldn't stop talking about it? Stay right here, because number 6 is about to blow your mind. Number 6. J-Hope, the street dancer who quietly built a billion-won real estate empire on borrowed courage. If there's one member of BTS who everybody underestimates when it comes to money moves, it's Hoseok, better known to the world as J-Hope, the sunshine of the group, the human energy drink, the guy who screams, "I'm your hope, you're my hope. I'm J-Hope," with so much intensity that you almost forget this man is sitting on one of the most aggressive real estate portfolios in the entire Korean entertainment industry. But before we get to the jaw-dropping numbers, let's go back to where it all started, because J-Hope's financial story doesn't begin in a penthouse. It begins on the streets of Gwangju. Young Hoseok was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, a mid-sized city in the southwestern part of South Korea, far from the glitz and glamour of Seoul's entertainment district. His family was solidly middle class, not poor, but definitely not wealthy. His father worked hard, his mother kept the household running, and young Hoseok found his escape in one thing: dance. And when I say this kid could dance, I mean he was a prodigy. He joined a local street dance crew called Neuron, and he didn't just participate, he dominated. He won national dance competitions, earned a reputation as one of the best young poppers and street dancers in the Gwangju underground scene, and started dreaming of a future where dance was his life. But here's the thing about being a street dancer in a city like Gwangju: it doesn't pay the bills. Dance competitions give you trophies and respect, not rent money. So when the opportunity came to audition for Big Hit Entertainment as a potential idol trainee, Hoseok grabbed it with both hands, even though it meant leaving his family, his crew, his comfort zone, and everything he knew. And just like every other BTS member, the moment he walked through those big hit doors, the trainee debt started accumulating. Vocal lessons, because let's be real, J-Hope was recruited primarily as a dancer, not a singer, so he had to build those skills from scratch. Rap training, because Big Hit wanted versatile performers. Housing in Seoul, food, transportation, styling, recording sessions, choreography workshops, all of it logged meticulously as money the company was investing in him, money he'd have to earn back before he ever saw a personal paycheck. And J-Hope trained for a significant period before BTS debuted in June 2013, which means his tab was growing month after month after month. Industry estimates for BTS members' trainee debts hover around 200 to 500 million won each, and for someone like J-Hope who needed extensive vocal and rap development on top of his dance skills, that number was likely substantial. But here's what makes J-Hope's story different from Jin's or from the members you'll hear about later. It's not just the trainee debt that puts him on this list. It's what he did after the money started flowing in. Because when BTS blew up and the paychecks went from modest to massive to absolutely absurd, J-Hope didn't just save his money or spend it on luxury goods like designer clothes and sports cars. No. Young Hoseok went full-blown real estate mogul, and he did it with a level of strategic aggression that would impress seasoned property investors twice his age. Let's talk numbers, because this is where it gets insane. J-Hope's first major known property purchase was an apartment in the Trainee complex in Seokjin, Seoul. This wasn't some starter apartment. Trainee is a premium residential and commercial complex in one of Seoul's trendiest neighborhoods, and J-Hope reportedly acquired his unit for approximately 1.7 billion won, which is roughly 1.3 to 1.4 million USD. For a young man in his mid-20s who grew up in a middle-class family in Gwangju, dropping that kind of money on a single property is a statement. But J-Hope was just getting started. The real headline came when reports emerged that J-Hope had purchased a unit in the legendary 9-1 Hanam complex, and if you don't know what 9-1 Hanam is, let me paint the picture for you. 9-1 Hanam is arguably the most exclusive, most expensive, most prestigious residential address in all of South Korea. We're talking about a development where individual units sell for anywhere between 7 billion to over 10 billion won. That's roughly 5 million to 8 million USD per unit. The residents include top-tier conglomerate heirs, legendary actors, and the absolute cream of Korean high society. And J-Hope, the kid from Gwangju who used to battle dance on concrete floors, bought in. Reports from Korean media outlets and real estate tracking sources indicated that J-Hope's 9-1 Hanam purchase was in the range of approximately 7 to 8 billion won. Let that sink in for a moment. That's a single property purchase worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes. And while nobody outside of J-Hope and his financial advisors knows the exact payment structure, whether he paid the full amount up front or utilized mortgage financing, the reality of South Korean real estate purchasing norms strongly suggests that even for someone as wealthy as J-Hope, a significant portion of a purchase this large would involve some form of leveraged financing. Korean mortgage rates, property taxes, acquisition taxes, and ongoing maintenance fees for a property of this caliber add up to a staggering ongoing financial commitment. We're talking about acquisition tax alone being potentially hundreds of millions of won. Monthly maintenance fees at a complex like 9-1 Hanam can run into several million won per month. And if any portion was financed through a mortgage, the interest payments over the life of the loan represent a debt obligation that stretches for years or even decades. But J-Hope's financial exposure doesn't stop at real estate. He's also a significant shareholder in Hybe Corporation, having received stock as part of BTS members' compensation packages. When Hybe went public on the Korean Stock Exchange in October 2020, the stock initially soared, making all 7 BTS members paper billionaires in one terms. J-Hope's stake was reportedly worth tens of billions of won at its peak. But anyone who follows the stock market knows that paper wealth is not the same as real wealth. Hybe's stock price has fluctuated dramatically since its IPO, experiencing significant drops that wiped out billions of won in value on paper. For J-Hope, whose personal net worth is significantly tied to Hybe stock, these fluctuations represent a form of financial exposure that most people never have to think about. When your wealth is concentrated in a single company's stock, a company whose value is heavily dependent on the continued success of its artists, including yourself, that's a unique kind of financial vulnerability. And then there's the philanthropy. J-Hope is one of the most generous donors in BTS, having donated hundreds of millions of won to various causes, including children's charities, education initiatives, and disaster relief funds. In 2018, he donated 150 million won to Child Fund Korea. He's continued donating significant amounts in the years since, and while these donations are obviously voluntary and deeply admirable, they also represent massive financial outflows that reduce his liquid wealth. When you combine the trainee debt he started with, the billions of won committed to luxury real estate, the volatile stock holdings, the ongoing costs of maintaining an ultra-premium lifestyle, and the hundreds of millions given to charity, J-Hope's total financial footprint is genuinely staggering. This is a man who went from winning street dance battles for zero prize money in Gwangju to managing a personal financial portfolio that rivals some small investment funds. The debts and obligations, whether in the form of mortgages, stock exposure, or the sheer cost of maintaining his position, are measured in the billions of won. And he handles it all with that signature J-Hope smile, making it look effortless when the reality is anything but. Young Hoseok didn't just learn to dance, he learned to play the money game at a level that most idols never even attempt. And if you think J-Hope's numbers were wild, just wait. Because number 5 is a member whose financial story involves a sacrifice so personal, so deeply connected to family, that it'll change the way you think about what it really costs to chase a dream. Keep watching. Number 5, Jimin, the boy from Busan whose family bet everything on a dream with no safety net. Let's talk about Park Jimin, because this right here is the kind of story that hits different when you really understand what was at stake. See, most people know Jimin as the silky-voiced, impossibly fluid dancer with the angelic smile and the abs that broke the internet. They know him as the member who trends worldwide every time he breathes, the guy whose solo track, like Crazy, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making history as a Korean solo artist. They see the sold-out stadiums, the Dior ambassadorship, the luxury apartments, the private cars, and they think, this man has always been destined for greatness. But if you rewind the tape to Busan in 2011 and 2012, the picture looks nothing like that. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Jumjeong District, Busan, the second largest city in South Korea, but a world away from the entertainment epicenter of Seoul. His family wasn't wealthy. His father reportedly ran a small business, a cafe, according to multiple Korean sources, and anyone who has ever operated a small food and beverage business knows the reality. The margins are brutal, the hours are endless, and financial stability is never guaranteed. Jimin grew up in an environment where money was earned through sweat and sacrifice, not handed out freely. But even in that modest setting, young Jimin had something extraordinary. He could move his body in ways that left people speechless. He enrolled in Busan High School of Arts, majoring in modern dance, and he wasn't just good, he was the top student. His teachers recognized immediately that this kid had a rare, almost supernatural talent for movement. His body control, his expressiveness, his ability to convey emotion through dance, it was on another level. And it was one of those teachers who changed the entire trajectory of Jimin's life by encouraging him to audition for big hit entertainment. Now stop and think about what that suggestion really meant for the Park family. Auditioning for a Seoul-based entertainment company meant that Jimin, a teenager, barely 16 or 17 years old, would have to leave Busan, leave his family, leave everything he knew, and move to a city where he had no connections, no safety net, and no guarantee of success. And if he got accepted as a trainee, it wouldn't be a scholarship or a paid position. It would mean accumulating debt. Real, documented, contractual debt to a company that, at the time, was still a small player in the K-pop industry with only one previously debuted group, 2AM, co-managed with JYP Entertainment. Big Hit in 2012 was essentially asking the Park family to gamble their son's future and their own financial stability on a company that most industry insiders didn't take seriously. And Jimin's family said yes. Let that sink in. A family running a small cafe in Busan, already navigating the daily stresses of tight finances, chose to support their teenage son's dream of becoming an idol in Seoul, fully knowing that it could lead to years of debt with no payoff. They didn't just emotionally support him, they financially enabled the move. The cost of relocating, the cost of living in Seoul, even with company housing support, the incidental expenses, the emotional toll of having their son hundreds of kilometers away. All of it fell on a family that couldn't afford to make expensive mistakes. And then came the trainee period, which for Jimin was uniquely intense and terrifying. Unlike some members who trained for 2 or 3 years and had time to settle in, Jimin joined Big Hit relatively late and had an extremely compressed training period. He transferred from Busan High School of Arts to Korean Arts High School in Seoul, uprooting his entire academic and social life in the process. And here's the part that most fans know but don't fully appreciate: the weight of Jimin was almost cut from the final lineup. He was reportedly in real danger of not making it into BTS. The company had doubts. His vocal training was still developing. His skills outside of dance needed more time. There were moments when it looked like the entire gamble, the family's sacrifice, the move to Seoul, the mounting trainee debt, was going to end in failure. Imagine being 16 years old, alone in a new city, knowing that your family scraped together resources to support you, knowing that every day you train the debt grows larger, and then being told you might not even debut. The psychological pressure of that is almost unbearable. The trainee debt alone, accumulating month after month, vocal coaches, dance training beyond what he already knew, rap development, Korean language and diction classes for singing, recording sessions, physical conditioning, dorm expenses, food, styling for pre-debut media, all of it being logged as money owed. For a compressed trainee who needed accelerated development in multiple areas simultaneously, the per-month investment from the company would have been significant, and that translates directly into higher debt accumulation in a shorter time frame. Obviously, Jimin made the cut. He debuted with BTS on June 13, 2013, and the rest is history, except the debt didn't just vanish because he was on stage. BTS's early years were lean. The paychecks were small. The trainee debt had to be paid back before any real personal income could flow. For a guy whose family had already stretched their finances thin to support him, those early years of earning just enough to chip away at the debt while barely having spending money must have been a special kind of pressure. He's spoken in various interviews and on V-Live broadcasts about how he used to feel guilty about his family's sacrifice, how he promised himself he would repay everything they gave up for him. And when the money finally started coming in, when BTS went from mid-tier to superstars and then to global icons, Jimin didn't forget. Now let's talk about what Jimin did with his wealth, because this is where the numbers get truly astronomical. Jimin purchased a luxury apartment in the Hanam the Hill complex in Seoul, the same ultra-exclusive residential development where several other BTS members and top Korean celebrities own property. His unit was reportedly valued at approximately 5.9 billion won, which translates to roughly 4.5 to 5 million USD. That's not a typo. A young man from a cafe-owning family in Busan bought a single apartment worth nearly $5 million. And that's just one known property. The acquisition taxes alone on a property of that value in South Korea run into hundreds of millions of won. We're talking potentially 400 to 500 million won just in taxes and fees associated with the purchase, not even counting the property itself. Then there are the ongoing costs, property taxes, maintenance fees that at Hanam the Hill run into millions of won per month, potential renovation and furnishing costs for a luxury unit, and if any portion of the purchase was mortgage financed, which is standard practice in Korean real estate even among high net worth individuals for tax optimization purposes. The loan obligations and interest payments represent a long-term financial commitment measured in billions. But Jimin's financial commitments aren't limited to his own comfort. Multiple reports and fan accounts over the years have documented Jimin's extraordinary generosity toward his family. He reportedly purchased a home for his parents, helped his younger brother, and provided financial support that transformed his family's circumstances from the modest cafe days in Busan to a completely different level of comfort and security. That's a debt repaid, the emotional debt to parents who risked everything, but it's also a significant financial outflow. Add to that his well-documented habit of buying expensive gifts for his fellow BTS members, his charitable donations, and his investments in personal projects. And you start to see a financial picture that is far more complex and far more leveraged than the casual observer would ever guess. Jimin also holds a significant stake in Hybe Corporation, and just like J-Hope, his net worth fluctuates with the stock price. When Hybe's stock drops, Jimin's paper wealth drops with it. When the market is volatile, his financial position is volatile. It's a form of exposure that creates enormous unrealized gains and losses on paper, adding another layer of financial complexity to an already dense portfolio. So when you calculate the full scope, the trainee debt he started with, the family sacrifice he swore to repay, the billions spent on real estate, the hundreds of millions in taxes and fees, the generous spending on family and friends, the charitable giving, and the volatile stock holdings, Park Jimin's total financial exposure is genuinely breathtaking. This is the boy who once cried on camera because he felt he wasn't good enough, the trainee who almost got cut, the son who carried the weight of his family's sacrifice on his shoulders every single day. And now he's managing financial commitments that would make corporate CFOs sweat. The debt, both financial and emotional, has been enormous. But Jimin carries it the way he carries every choreography, with precision, grace, and a quiet strength that makes it look easy when it's anything but. Alright, take a breath, because we're moving into the top half of this list now, and trust me, number 4 involves a member whose relationship with money, art, and personal identity created a financial story so unique that it defies every expectation you have about what an idol does with their wealth. Don't go anywhere. Number 4, RM, the genius who poured billions into art that most people don't even understand. Okay, let's shift gears here because number 4 is unlike anything else on this list, and honestly, it might be unlike anything you've ever heard in the world of K-pop idols and money. We're talking about Kim Namjoon, RM, the leader of BTS, the man with a verified IQ of 148, the self-taught English speaker who addressed the United Nations, the rapper-philosopher who quotes Nietzsche and Murakami in the same sentence and somehow makes it cool. Most idols spend their money on sports cars, designer wardrobes, and flashy jewelry. RM? RM spent billions of won on paintings, on sculptures, on contemporary art pieces that most ordinary people would walk past in a museum without a second glance. And that decision, that obsessive, passionate, deeply personal decision, created a financial story so fascinating and so risky that it deserves its own documentary. But before we get to the art and the astronomical price tags, let's go back to where Namjoon's story really begins, because the very first debt this man ever carried wasn't financial, it was emotional, and it weighed heavier than any number on a bank statement. Kim Namjoon was born on September 12, 1994, in Ilsan, a planned suburban city within Goyang, Gyeonggi Province. Unlike the gritty origin stories of some BTS members, Namjoon grew up in a relatively comfortable, education-focused middle-class household. His parents were the kind of Korean parents who valued academic achievement above almost everything else, and honestly, with Namjoon's brain, they had every reason to push him toward a conventional path. The kid was brilliant. He consistently scored in the top percentiles on national exams. His IQ test reportedly came back at 148, placing him in the gifted category. He was the kind of student that teachers look at and think, this one's going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a professor, something safe, something prestigious, something that makes parents proud at family gatherings. And that's exactly what Namjoon's parents expected. But somewhere in that brilliant, restless mind, something else was brewing. Namjoon discovered hip-hop. Specifically, he heard Epic High's Fly, and it rewired his entire worldview. Suddenly, the kid who was supposed to be studying for college entrance exams was writing rap lyrics in his notebook, sneaking out to underground hip-hop shows, and building a reputation in the Korean underground rap scene under the name Runch Randa. He was genuinely talented. His wordplay, his flow, his ability to construct complex lyrical narratives was already years ahead of most aspiring rappers his age. And then came the moment that shattered his parents' dreams. Namjoon told them he wanted to be a rapper. Not a hobby rapper. Not a I'll do this on weekends while I study medicine rapper. A full-time, professional, this is my life rapper. The reaction was exactly what you'd expect from Korean parents who had invested years of hope and resources into their son's academic future. They were devastated. They argued. They pleaded. They told him he was throwing away a guaranteed future for a fantasy. And in many ways, they weren't wrong. The odds of making it as a rapper in South Korea in 2010 were astronomically low. The underground scene paid almost nothing. The idol path was a gamble. The music industry chewed up talented kids and spit them out broke and broken every single day. But Namjoon was stubborn in the way that only true geniuses can be, quietly, intellectually, unshakably certain that this was his path. When he auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment and got accepted, it wasn't a celebration in the Kim household. It was a fracture. His parents' reluctant acceptance carried an unspoken condition: prove us wrong, or this was all for nothing. And that emotional debt, the weight of disappointing your parents, of knowing they sacrificed their vision of your future so you could chase yours, of carrying the silent pressure to succeed not just for yourself, but to justify their pain. That's a debt that no amount of money can fully repay. It's the kind of debt that sits in your chest at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. It's the kind of debt that drives you to work harder than everyone around you, even when you're already exhausted. And for Namjoon, it drove him to become not just the leader of BTS, but the intellectual and emotional backbone of the greatest musical act of the 21st century. Now, the trainee debt. Same story, different details. Namjoon entered Big Hit, and the clock started. Rap development, vocal training, dance lessons, and dance was particularly brutal for Namjoon because unlike J-Hope or Jimin, Namjoon was not a natural dancer. He's spoken openly and hilariously about how difficult choreography was for him, how he'd practice for hours while others picked up routines in minutes. That extra practice time, those additional sessions, the wear and tear on the company's resources to develop him into a complete performer, all of it added to the trainee debt. By the time BTS debuted in June 2013, Namjoon's accumulated obligations were right there alongside his bandmates, and the early years of modest earnings meant that debt lingered like a shadow. But here's where RM's financial story takes a turn that nobody in K-pop saw coming. When the real money started flowing, when BTS became a global phenomenon and Namjoon's personal income soared into the billions of won annually, he didn't follow the typical idol wealth playbook. Sure, he bought real estate. He purchased an apartment in the Hanam the Hill complex, reportedly valued at approximately 4 to 5 billion won, putting him in the same ultra-luxury neighborhood as his bandmates. The acquisition taxes, maintenance fees, and potential mortgage obligations associated with that purchase are substantial. We've already covered those numbers with Jin and Jimin, so you know the scale we're talking about. But what sets RM apart? What genuinely makes his financial story one of the most unique in Korean celebrity history is his art collection. Kim Namjoon is not a casual art appreciator. He is a serious, passionate, borderline obsessive art collector whose personal collection has become one of the most talked about private collections in South Korea. He's been photographed at galleries and museums in every country BTS has visited. He's spoken in interviews about how art feeds his creativity, how standing in front of a painting can change the way he writes music, how he sees collecting art as a form of conversation with history and humanity. And he puts his money where his mouth is, billions of won worth of money. Korean media outlets have reported extensively on RM's art purchases over the years. He's acquired works by major Korean contemporary artists, including pieces by artists like Yoon Hyung-kun, Park Seo-bo, and other figures whose works command premium prices in the international art market. Individual pieces by artists of this caliber can sell for anywhere from tens of millions to several billion won each. When you're building a collection, not buying one piece as a decoration, but systematically acquiring a curated body of work across multiple artists and periods, the total investment escalates rapidly into territory that would make traditional financial advisors extremely nervous. And here's the thing about art as an investment that most people don't understand. It's one of the most illiquid, unpredictable, and risky asset classes in existence. Unlike real estate, which generates rental income and has relatively transparent market pricing, art sits on your wall and generates zero cash flow. Its value is entirely dependent on market sentiment, critical reception, cultural trends, and the reputation of the artist, all of which can shift dramatically. A painting you buy for 500 million won today could be worth 2 billion won in 10 years, or it could be worth 200 million won. There are no guarantees. There are no dividends. There is only the belief that what you're holding has enduring cultural and financial value. For RM, whose collection is reportedly valued in the multiple billions of won collectively, this represents an enormous concentration of wealth in an asset class that most financial professionals would categorize as high risk. He's essentially betting a significant portion of his fortune on his own taste, his own judgment, his own ability to identify artistic value before the broader market catches up. That's either visionary or reckless, depending on who you ask, and honestly, it's probably a little bit of both. And then there's the philanthropy angle. RM donated 100 million won to the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in South Korea for art education programs. He's made additional donations to cultural and educational causes over the years. These are beautiful, meaningful gestures that reflect his genuine love for art and culture, but they also represent significant financial outflows from a portfolio that's already heavily weighted toward illiquid assets. Add it all up. The emotional debt to parents who sacrificed their dreams for the trainee debt that took years to resolve, the multi-billion won real estate commitments, the art collection worth billions more with no guaranteed return, the stock holdings that fluctuate with Hybe's market performance, and the ongoing charitable giving, RM's total financial exposure is genuinely extraordinary. Number 3. The farmer's son who was never supposed to be here, but owes everything to a grandmother's quiet sacrifice. This one is going to hurt. I'm warning you right now, because the story of Kim Taehyung, the man the world knows as V, the deep-voiced enigma of BTS, the face that Celine and Cartier fight over, the artist whose solo album, Layover, dripped with melancholy and sophistication. This story doesn't start on a stage or in a practice room. It starts on a farm. A real, dirt under your fingernails, Wake up before sunrise, harvest the crops, kind of farm in a tiny rural area that most people, even most Koreans, have never heard of. And the debt that Kim Taehyung carries, the debt that shaped every note he's ever sung and every tear he's ever shed on camera, is the kind of debt that money can never, ever fully repay. Kim Taehyung was born on December 30th, 1995, in Daegu, South Korea's fourth largest city, but he didn't grow up in the urban center. His family moved to Jeocheon County, a small, quiet, deeply rural area in South Gyeongsang Province, surrounded by mountains and farmland, far removed from the neon lights and entertainment agencies of Seoul. And when I say rural, I mean rural. Jeocheon is the kind of place where the nearest convenience store is a drive away, where your neighbors are farmers, where life is measured by seasons and harvests rather than by chart positions and streaming numbers. Taehyung's family were farmers. His parents worked the land, physically demanding, financially unpredictable work that depends on weather, market prices, and sheer endurance. Farming in South Korea, particularly small-scale family farming, is not a path to wealth. It's a path to survival. The income is modest at best, the costs of seeds, equipment, and labor are relentless, and one bad season can set a family back for years. This was the world Taehyung was born into, not poverty in the dramatic, cinematic sense, but the quiet, grinding, everyday kind of poverty where you don't go hungry, but you also don't have anything extra. Where buying new clothes is a carefully considered decision. Where a school trip requires weeks of budgeting. Where the idea of your son becoming a pop star in Seoul isn't a dream, it's an absurdity. But here's the detail that breaks my heart every time I think about it. Taehyung was primarily raised by his grandmother. While his parents worked, and in Korean farming families, both parents often work from dawn to dusk during planting and harvesting seasons, it was his grandmother who fed him, dressed him, walked him to school, sat with him in the evenings, and poured every ounce of love she had into this quiet, unusual, deeply sensitive boy who seemed to exist in his own world. Taehyung has spoken about his grandmother with a tenderness that transcends language. In interviews, in behind-the-scenes footage, in the quiet moments that cameras sometimes accidentally capture, you can see how deeply that bond shaped him. His grandmother didn't have money. She didn't have connections. She didn't have any understanding of the entertainment industry or what it meant to be a K-pop idol. But she had love, unconditional, unwavering, sacrificial love, and she gave all of it to Taehyung. And the debt he owes her for that? That's the kind of debt that keeps you up at night even when you're sleeping in a 1,000,000,001 penthouse. Now here's where the story takes its most dramatic turn, and honestly, it's the kind of twist that if you put it in a movie script, people would say it's too unrealistic. Taehyung didn't even go to the big hit entertainment audition to audition. He went to support a friend. His friend was the one who wanted to try out, and Taehyung tagged along, probably figuring he'd just hang out and wait. But someone at the audition, accounts vary on exactly who, noticed Taehyung and encouraged him to audition too. On a whim. On a completely unplanned, spur-of-the-moment impulse, Kim Taehyung walked into that audition room and changed the course of his entire life. He got accepted. His friend, the one he came to support, did not. Let that irony sit with you for a moment. The kid who wasn't even supposed to be there, the farmer's grandson from a tiny rural town, the boy who showed up as a spectator, he's the one who got chosen. And just like that, the debt clock started ticking. But for the Kim family in Jeocheon, the decision to let Taehyung go to Seoul wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Moving a teenager to Seoul, even with company-provided housing, involves costs. Travel between Jeocheon and Seoul for family visits. The loss of a family member who could have contributed to the farm's labor. The opportunity cost of education. If Taehyung had stayed, he might have pursued a conventional career that provided stable income to help the family. Instead, they were sending him into an industry with a failure rate that would terrify any rational parent, backed by a small company that most people in the music industry gave very little chance of survival. And once Taehyung entered Big Hit as a trainee, the financial obligations began accumulating just like they did for every other member. But Taehyung's situation was unique in one crucial way. Big Hit made the decision to keep him as a secret trainee. While other members were being introduced to fans through pre-debut content, blog posts, and social media reveals, Taehyung was kept hidden. He wasn't in the early promotional photos. He wasn't featured in the pre-debut videos. He was a ghost in the system, training behind closed doors while the rest of the world had no idea he existed. The company's strategy was to reveal him as a surprise closer to debut, which built intrigue but also meant that Taehyung was investing months of his life and accumulating months of trainee debt, without any of the early fan connection or public validation that his bandmates were receiving. Imagine being a teenager from a farm, alone in Seoul, training every day in dance, vocal, and rap, knowing that nobody outside the company even knows you're there, and knowing that every day the debt grows while you can't even tell your friends back home what you're doing. The isolation, the pressure, the uncertainty, it's the kind of psychological weight that would crush most adults, let alone a kid. And then BTS debuted, and Taehyung was revealed, and the world collectively lost its mind over this ethereal, deep-voiced, impossibly beautiful boy who seemed to have materialized out of thin air. But the debt didn't vanish with the debut. The early years were lean. BTS was grinding through small venues and modest album sales. The trainee debt was being slowly repaid from the group's earnings, but for someone like Taehyung, whose family back in Gyeochang was still farming, still working the land, still living the same modest life, the pressure to succeed wasn't abstract. It was specific. It had his grandmother's face. It had his parents' calloused hands. Every one that went toward trainee debt repayment was a one that didn't go back to his family, and you can bet that knowledge burned. Fast forward to the global explosion, and Taehyung's financial trajectory went vertical. As V, he became one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Brand deals with luxury fashion houses, solo music projects, acting roles, Hybe stock allocations, the money flowed in at a pace that would have been incomprehensible to the farming family in Gyeochang just a few years earlier. And what did Taehyung do with it? He bought real estate. Big real estate. Taehyung purchased a luxury apartment in the Hanam the Hill complex. Yes, the same complex that keeps showing up on this list because apparently when BTS buys property, they buy in the same neighborhood like it's a group project. His unit was reportedly valued at approximately 4.4 to 5.2 billion won, depending on the source and the timing of the valuation. That's roughly 3.5 to 4.2 million USD for a single residential unit. The acquisition taxes, registration fees, and legal costs associated with a purchase of that magnitude in South Korea run into hundreds of millions of won. The monthly maintenance fees at Hanam the Hill are measured in millions of won. And if any portion was financed, which, again, is standard practice even among ultra-wealthy Korean buyers for tax and liquidity optimization, the mortgage obligations represent a long-term financial commitment that stretches for years. But the real estate is almost secondary to the deeper financial story, which is what Taehyung has done for his family. While the specific details are largely kept private, Taehyung is notably protective of his family's privacy. Multiple Korean media reports and fan-documented accounts over the years have indicated that he has invested significantly in improving his family's circumstances. The farmer's grandson made sure the farming family would never have to worry about a bad harvest again. The boy who was raised by his grandmother made sure his grandmother would never want for anything. The scale of that financial transformation from a rural farming income to receiving support from one of the highest-earning entertainers in the world represents a transfer of wealth and security that is profoundly beautiful but also profoundly expensive. Number 2, Jungkook, the child who left home at 13 and built a real estate empire before turning 25. If there's a single story in the entire history of K-pop that perfectly captures the terrifying beauty of risking absolutely everything, childhood, family, normalcy, innocence, on a dream that could just as easily destroy you as make you, it's the story of Jungkook. And I need you to really hear that, because the world sees Jungkook and they see the golden magne, the guy who can sing, dance, rap, draw, film, edit, do athletic tricks, and basically master anything he touches within 48 hours. They see the artist who dropped 7, and it went straight to number 1 globally. They see Standing Next to You and the retro grooves and the Michael Jackson comparisons. They see the six-pack and the tattoos and the confidence of a man who seems like he was born to stand on the biggest stages in the world. But what they don't see, what gets lost in the highlight reels and the fan cams and the streaming records, is that this man's story begins with a 13-year-old boy sobbing in a train station because he just left the only home he's ever known. And he's heading to a city where he knows absolutely nobody, to join a company that might not even survive long enough for him to debut. That's not a movie. That's Jungkook's actual life. And the debt that story created, financial, emotional, psychological, is so enormous that even now, with all his fame and all his money, it defines who he is. Jungkook was born on September 1st, 1997, in Mandeokdong, Busan, South Korea. Let me do the math for you. When BTS debuted on June 13, 2013, Jungkook was 15 years old. When he left Busan to become a trainee at Big Hit Entertainment in Seoul, he was around 13, depending on whether you're counting Korean age or international age. 13. That's middle school. That's the age when most kids are worried about homework and video games and whether their crush likes them back. Jungkook was worried about whether he'd made the right decision to leave his entire family behind to chase a dream in an industry that has a documented failure rate of over 90%. His family in Busan was ordinary, working class, doing their best to provide a stable life. They weren't wealthy. They weren't connected. They were just a regular Korean family whose youngest son happened to have an extraordinary amount of talent and an even more extraordinary amount of courage. Or maybe it was naivety. Because at 13, can you really understand what you're giving up? The story of how Jungkook ended up at Big Hit is legendary at this point. In 2011, he auditioned for the third season of Superstar K, one of South Korea's biggest televised singing competitions. He didn't win. He didn't even get particularly far. But something about him, his voice, his presence, his raw potential, caught the attention of multiple entertainment companies. By most accounts, around 7 different agencies contacted him after his Superstar K appearance, offering him a trainee position. 7. That's an absurd number. Companies like SM, JYP, Fantajo, big names, established names, safe names, all wanted Jungkook. And what did this 13-year-old kid from Busan do? He chose Big Hit. The small company. The struggling company. The company that most industry professionals would have ranked dead last among those 7 options. Why? Because he saw RM. He watched Namjoon rap and was so impressed by his charisma and skill that he decided, on what was essentially a gut feeling, to follow Namjoon to Big Hit. A 13-year-old's instinct chose the trajectory of a multi-billion-dollar career. And the moment that decision was made, the John family had to face the most agonizing question any parent can confront. Do we let our baby go? Not to a school down the road. Not to a summer camp. To Seoul. To a small entertainment company. To a life of grueling training with no guarantee of success. To a contractual arrangement where their child would accumulate debt before he was old enough to legally drive a car. Jungkook's parents said yes, and that yes cost them something that no financial analysis can quantify: years of their youngest son's childhood that they would never get back. Every school event he missed. Every dinner table with an empty chair. Every birthday where he was in a practice room instead of blowing out candles at home. Every time his mother wanted to hug him and he was 400 kilometers away, learning choreography until his legs gave out. That's a debt that the John family extended to the universe, hoping, praying that it would pay off. And the financial debt started accumulating immediately. Jungkook began training at Big Hit around age 13 and trained for approximately 2 years before debut. 2 full years of vocal training, dance training, rap development, physical conditioning, language classes, stage presence coaching, recording sessions, and all the daily expenses of housing, feeding, and developing a teenage trainee in Seoul. And remember, Jungkook wasn't just any trainee, he was absurdly young, which meant the company had to invest additional resources in his development. His voice hadn't even fully matured yet. His body was still growing. He was going through puberty while trying to become a professional performer, which added layers of complexity to his training that older trainees didn't face. Vocal coaches had to work with a voice that was literally changing month to month. Dance instructors had to accommodate a body that was getting taller and reshaping its center of gravity in real time. The investment was intensive, sustained, and meticulously documented in the company's ledgers. Industry estimates place BTS members' individual trainee debts at potentially 200 to 500 million won, and for someone like Jungkook who trained from such a young age and required this level of specialized development, there's no reason to think his debt was on the lower end. And then BTS debuted, and the early years were exactly as lean as they were for every other member. Small stages, minimal income, paychecks that went straight toward chipping away at the trainee debt. But for Jungkook, there was an additional psychological dimension to this financial reality that's easy to overlook. He was a minor. While his hyungs were at least in their late teens or early 20s when they started dealing with the financial pressures of trainee debt and modest earnings, Jungkook was navigating this as a teenager who hadn't even finished high school. He's spoken in various documentaries and behind-the-scenes content about how he didn't fully understand the adult world he'd been thrust into, how he sometimes felt lost and overwhelmed, how the older members became his surrogate family because his actual family was back in Busan. The emotional debt to the hyungs who raised him in that cramped dorm, to the parents who let him go, to the childhood he traded for a shot at stardom, was accumulating alongside the financial debt, creating a pressure that would have broken most adults, let alone a kid. But it didn't break Jungkook. It forged him. And when BTS went supernova and the money started flowing in quantities that would have been unimaginable to that crying 13-year-old at the Busan train station, Jungkook did something that reveals just how much he'd grown. He became one of the most aggressive real estate investors in all of Korean entertainment. Let's talk about the numbers, because they are genuinely staggering. Jungkook's real estate portfolio is the stuff of financial legend. One of his earliest reported major purchases was an apartment in the Seoul Forest Trimmage Complex, acquired for approximately 1.95 billion won. That's roughly $5.7 million USD. Multiple Korean media outlets and real estate tracking sources reported on this acquisition, and the sheer scale of it for someone who was still in his mid-20s at the time sent shockwaves through the Korean property market. 7 billion won. For a single property. Purchased by a man who was living in a shared dorm with 6 other guys barely a decade earlier. And the financial implications of a purchase at that level are enormous. Acquisition taxes in South Korea for high-value properties can run as high as 12 to 13% of the purchase price when you factor in all the combined taxes and surcharges, which means Jungkook potentially paid close to 700 million to almost 1 billion won in taxes alone, just for the privilege of buying the property. That's before a single piece of furniture was moved in. Monthly maintenance fees for ultra-luxury properties of this caliber run into multiple millions of won. Property taxes are an annual obligation. And if any portion of these purchases was mortgage financed, and given the scale of the numbers, leveraged financing is not only plausible but financially rational for asset management and tax optimization. The loan obligations represent debt commitments stretching potentially 15 to 30 years, with interest payments adding hundreds of millions or even billions of won over the life of the loans. But Jungkook didn't stop at residential property. Korean media outlets have also reported on additional property acquisitions and investments, suggesting that his total real estate portfolio could be valued in the range of tens of billions of won. For a man born in 1997, that's a real estate empire that would be impressive for someone 3 decades his senior, let alone a 20-something pop star. Number 1. Suga, the boy who nearly died delivering food just to afford a dream nobody believed in. This is it. Number 1. The top of the list. And if you thought the stories before this were heavy, if you thought the debts carried by Jin, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook were staggering, you need to brace yourself, because the story of Min Yoongi, the man the world calls Suga, the man who became Auguste, is not just a story about debt. It's a story about what happens when the universe does everything in its power to destroy a dream, and one stubborn, broken, impossibly resilient human being refuses to let it die. This is the story that makes grown men cry. This is the story that changes how you hear every BTS song. This is the story that earns the #1 spot not because of the size of the numbers, although those are enormous, but because of the sheer magnitude of suffering, sacrifice, and survival that sits behind every single one. Min Yoongi was born on March 9, 1993, in Daegu, South Korea, and from the very beginning, life was not kind. His family was poor. Not, we can't afford luxury, poor, genuinely, structurally, painfully poor. His family struggled with financial difficulties that permeated every aspect of daily life. In Korean society, where economic status deeply influences social standing, educational opportunities, and future prospects, growing up in a household burdened by financial hardship doesn't just affect your wallet, it affects your identity, your confidence, your sense of what's possible. Yoongi has spoken in interviews, in his music, and in documentary footage about the atmosphere of financial stress that hung over his childhood. His parents worked hard, incredibly hard, but the math of poverty is cruel. When expenses consistently outpace income, when debts accumulate not because of recklessness, but because of the sheer cost of existing, when every month is a negotiation between what bills get paid and what gets deferred. That creates a psychological environment of constant anxiety that seeps into a child's bones. Young Yoongi absorbed all of it. He saw his parents stress. He understood, earlier than most kids should have to, that money was a problem and that his family's debts were a weight they carried every single day. And in the middle of that environment, something happened that would alter the course of Korean music history. Min Yoongi discovered hip-hop. He heard Stony Skunk's Raga Muffin on the radio, and something clicked. Then he discovered Epic High, and the click became a detonation. Suddenly, this quiet, intense kid from the rough side of Daegu found a language for everything he was feeling: the anger, the frustration, the sadness, the desperate hope that there had to be something more than this. He started writing lyrics. He started studying rap. He started visiting the local music scene, connecting with other aspiring artists, absorbing everything he could about production, composition, and performance. And by the time he was a teenager, Min Yoongi was fully consumed by one burning, irrational, financially suicidal ambition. He was going to be a musician. His parents were not supportive. Let me be very clear about that, because this isn't one of those stories where the family rallies around the dream. Yoongi's parents saw a son who wanted to pursue music in a country where the entertainment industry is a meat grinder, where the odds of success are microscopic, and where failure means you've wasted years of your life that could have been spent getting a real education and a real job. They saw a family already drowning in financial stress, and their son wanted to add to that stress by chasing a fantasy. The arguments were real. The disappointment was real. The distance it created between Yoongi and his parents was real. He's rapped about it. He's cried about it on camera. The emotional debt of defying your parents' wishes, of knowing that every step you take toward your dream is a step that breaks their hearts. That's a debt that doesn't show up on any financial statement, but it's heavier than anything a bank can charge you. But Yoongi didn't stop. He couldn't. Music wasn't a hobby for him, it was oxygen. And because his family couldn't and wouldn't financially support his music ambitions, Yoongi did something that reveals the kind of raw, desperate determination that separates dreamers from survivors. He got jobs. Multiple jobs. Part-time gigs that he squeezed in around school and music, just to earn enough money to fund his own development. He worked at a recording studio, not as a producer or an engineer, but as essentially a handyman, doing whatever needed to be done, just so he could be near the equipment and occasionally get studio time to work on his own music. The pay was minimal. The hours were brutal. But it gave him access to a world he couldn't afford to enter through the front door. And then there was the delivery job. This is the part of the story that physically hurts to tell. So there you have it. 7 members. 7 stories. 7 mountains of debt, financial, emotional, familial, physical, psychological, that most people will never know existed behind the synchronized choreography and the record-breaking streams. But before you close this out, let's take a step back and look at what this list really reveals, because it's bigger than BTS. It's bigger than K-pop. It's a mirror held up to every person who's ever chased a dream and wondered whether the cost was worth it. First, the numbers. When you aggregate the financial exposure across all 7 members, trainee debts that potentially totaled between 1.4 billion to 3.5 billion won combined. Real estate portfolios collectively worth an estimated 30 to 40 billion won or more. Hybe stock holdings that have fluctuated by tens of billions of won in value. Business ventures that consumed hundreds of millions in losses. Art collections worth billions with no guaranteed return. Charitable donations totaling well over 1 billion won. Collectively, and the incalculable medical, tax, and lifestyle costs associated with maintaining their positions, the total financial footprint of BTS as 7 individuals is genuinely staggering. We're talking about numbers that rival small corporate balance sheets. These aren't just pop stars. They're financial entities whose combined obligations, investments, and exposures stretch across real estate, equity markets, alternative assets, and philanthropic commitments in ways that most professional wealth managers would find complex. Second, the sacrifices. Every member on this list paid an entry fee that had nothing to do with money. Jin gave up the safety of a comfortable family background to bet on an unstable company. J-Hope left a thriving dance career in Gwangju to start from scratch in Seoul. Jimin nearly got cut from the group after his family scraped together resources to send him away. RM defied his parents' academic dreams and staked his genius on an industry that doesn't reward intelligence. V accidentally stumbled into an audition that ripped him away from a grandmother who gave him everything. Jungkook left home at 13 and traded his childhood for a trainee contract. And Suga nearly bled out on a Taegu street delivering food just to keep a dream alive that nobody believed in. Those sacrifices aren't footnotes. They're the foundation that everything else was built on. Third, the lesson. Debt is not a dirty word. The narrative around debt is almost always negative. It's something to avoid, something to escape, something that traps you. But the story of BTS proves that sometimes debt is the price of transformation. The trainee debt that weighed on their shoulders during those early years was also the investment that gave them the skills to become the greatest act of their generation. The emotional debts to their families became the fuel for music that resonated with hundreds of millions of people worldwide. The financial risks they took with real estate, business ventures, and art collections are expressions of people who refused to play it safe because they learned, through years of struggle, that playing it safe is the most dangerous thing you can do. And finally, the truth nobody talks about. Even now, even after all the success, and all the money, and all the records broken, these 7 men are still carrying debt. Not in the traditional sense. Their bank accounts are more than healthy. But the emotional debts? The debt to the parents who sacrificed? The debt to the fans who believed when the world didn't? The debt to each other for holding the group together through years of exhaustion and doubt? The debt to the kid each of them used to be, the kid who dreamed this impossible dream and somehow, against every odd, made it real? Those debts don't have an expiration date. They don't get paid off with a wire transfer. They get paid off in the way you live your life, in the art you create, in the love you give back to the people who carried you when you couldn't carry yourself. BTS didn't become BTS despite their debts. They became BTS because of them. And that right there is the most valuable thing this list can teach you, that the weight you carry isn't what holds you down. It's what makes you strong enough to fly. Thanks for staying until the end. This has been 7 BTS members who have debts of fantastic value. If any of these stories moved you, share it, because everyone needs to hear what it really costs to turn a dream into reality.